The night it started, I was doing something completely ordinary. Scrolling through Facebook without thinking much of it. Then I saw it. A glossy photo of my sister standing beside a brand new Tesla, captioned with a proud declaration about hard work, discipline, and never taking handouts. The comments poured in fast. Applause, admiration, certainty. And as I stared at that screen, I realized that one sentence, just one, was about to pull years of quiet, carefully managed family history into the light. The photo was framed perfectly. The angle caught the shine of the paint, the clean lines, the kind of lighting that makes everything look earned and effortless at the same time. My sister stood beside the car like it was a milestone carved out of discipline alone. The result of hard work, she wrote. No handouts. It was bold, clean, final. Within minutes, the likes started stacking up. Hearts, fire emojis, comments from friends and distant relatives who hadn't seen her in years. So proud of you. This is what dedication looks like. You deserve it. And I watched it happen in real time. Each notification felt like a small brick being laid on top of a version of the story that didn't include me. Not even as a footnote. The post wasn't just celebrating a car. It was constructing a narrative one where struggle was conquered alone, where independence was pure and untouched by anyone else's help. I scrolled through the comments slowly. People were repeating her caption back to her, reinforcing it, amplifying it. Hard work, self-made, no shortcuts. What unsettled me wasn't the car. It wasn't even the praise. It was the erasure. The way one sentence, no handouts, swept years of quiet support into nothing. As if the transfers, the late night calls, the don't worry about it, conversations had never existed. As if choosing not to expose family matters publicly meant they could be rewritten entirely. I had kept everything private on purpose. Not because I was ashamed, but because I believed in protecting the family's image. I believed silence was a responsible choice. That support didn't need an audience. But reading that caption, watching strangers applaud a carefully polished version of independence, something shifted in me. Staying silent suddenly felt less like loyalty and more like participation in a lie. My thumb hovered over the screen. I reread the caption. I reread the comments. I felt that familiar instinct rise up, the one that says, let it go, don't complicate things, this isn't worth the fallout. But another thought pressed in. Just as firmly, if I say nothing, this becomes the official story. I didn't draft a long explanation. I didn't expose details. I didn't list amounts or dates or history. I typed one sentence. You forgot to mention that car was bought with my savings. I stared at it before hitting post. It looked small on the screen, almost harmless, but I knew it wasn't. That sentence carried weight far beyond its size. It wasn't about embarrassing her. It wasn't about claiming credit. It was about refusing to let the truth be quietly edited out of existence. When I pressed enter, the comment appeared beneath the celebration. Plain, direct, impossible to misread. For a few seconds, nothing happened. The post still shimmered with admiration. The hearts kept floating upward, but I felt the shift immediately. There's a specific kind of silence that follows a truth no one was prepared to hear. Even before the notifications changed, I could sense it forming. The clean narrative had been interrupted. The applause now had an echo in it. And sitting there with my phone in my hand, I understood that I had just stepped out of the role I'd been playing for years, the quiet supporter behind the curtain, and into something far less comfortable. Not louder, not dramatic, just visible. The truth didn't start with a car. It started much earlier in smaller moments that felt reasonable at the time. The first time my sister called about money, it sounded temporary. She was anxious, embarrassed even. Rent was short that month. There had been a delay with work, and the landlord had posted a notice that felt heavier than it probably was. I remember sitting at my kitchen table listening to her explain it in that careful tone people use when they don't want to seem irresponsible. It didn't feel dramatic. I was stable. I had savings. Covering one missed rent payment didn't feel like stepping into a long-term role. It felt like helping family. So I transferred the money, no paperwork, no formal conversation about repayment. Just a quiet understanding that this was a one-time bridge. A few months later, there was a credit card balance that had gotten away from her. She said it was temporary, just a billing cycle that spiraled because of an unexpected expense. She promised she'd pay me back once things leveled out. I remember hesitating for half a second longer that time, but I still sent the payment. It wasn't life-changing for me. It prevented stress for her. That seemed like enough justification. Then came the smaller transfers, car insurance, a utility bill that landed at the wrong time, gas money during a stretch when work hours were inconsistent. None of it was framed as permanent. Each request stood alone, disconnected from the others, as if they existed in separate bubbles. But when you line up enough temporary moments, they stop being temporary. At some point, I noticed I was transferring money every few weeks. Not because I had agreed to a schedule. It just happened. A message would come through short, casual, almost preemptive. Hey, just a heads up, insurance is due, or I'm waiting on a payment to clear. The urgency softened over time. The embarrassment faded. What used to sound like a crisis started sounding like an expectation wrapped in politeness. And I didn't challenge it. I told myself I was preventing bigger problems, that stepping in quietly kept things from escalating. I believed I was preserving stability, but what I was actually doing was building a system without naming it. My parents knew. I never hid it from them. If I covered rent, they heard about it. If I cleared a balance, it came up in conversation. Their reactions were steady and neutral. Not enthusiastic, not concerned. Just accepting. They didn't tell me to stop. They didn't insist Marlene take full responsibility either. There were no family meetings about boundaries or fairness. No one sat down and said, "Let's define this." The absence of resistance made it feel normal. That neutrality was powerful. When something is neither criticized nor corrected, it settles into the background. It becomes part of the furniture. And soon you stop seeing it as an arrangement at all. It's just how things work. Over time, the language changed in subtle ways. Instead of, "Can you help me?" it became, "I'll sort it out next month." Instead of detailing the problem, she'd reference it vaguely as if I already understood the context. Sometimes the money moved before I fully processed why it was needed. I'd fill in the gaps myself. I noticed the shift, but I didn't confront it. Every time I considered it, I imagined the ripple effect, the tension, the awkward conversations. I convinced myself that keeping the peace was worth the cost. So I stayed quiet. That silence did something I didn't fully grasp at the time. It removed friction. Without friction, nothing forces a system to adjust. Without questions, no one has to clarify roles. And when no one clarifies roles, they harden. By the time I realized how much the total had grown, it no longer felt like a series of favors. It felt structural. There were larger transfers framed as loans that were never formally revisited. Smaller ones filled in invisible gaps. I tracked everything privately, not because I planned to demand repayment, but because I needed to know the shape of what I was carrying. From the outside, everything looked stable. My sister paid her bills. She kept her apartment. She maintained her lifestyle. There were no visible breakdowns. If anything, she seemed to be doing fine, and that's what made it fragile. The stability wasn't coming from her income alone. It wasn't even coming from shared family responsibility. It was coming from me stepping in before cracks could widen. I absorbed the inconsistencies so they never surfaced publicly. That's how the system formed, quietly, incrementally, without anyone declaring it. The more reliable I became, the less visible the support was. It blended into the background. What began as help evolved into silent backup. I wasn't asked to define limits, so none were established. I wasn't thanked in ways that acknowledged scale because the scale was never openly discussed. It was easier for everyone to treat it as small, manageable, and temporary, including me. Looking back, I see how my parents' neutrality wasn't passive. It was stabilizing. Their lack of objection signaled approval, even if it was unspoken. And because there was no pushback, the pattern deepened. I never demanded accountability. She never offered it voluntarily. My parents never intervened to redistribute responsibility, so the arrangement continued uninterrupted. On the surface, it looked like family, supporting family. Beneath that surface, it was a one-sided structure growing more permanent by the month. And the most powerful part of it wasn't the money. It was the silence that protected it. A few days after I posted that comment, my phone started ringing. Mom called first. Her voice wasn't loud. It wasn't angry. It was calm in a way that made it clear she had already decided what the problem was before dialing my number. She didn't ask if what I wrote was true. She didn't ask how long things had been building or what led me to say it publicly. There was no curiosity about context. Instead, she asked, "Do you realize how this makes our family look?" That was the center of the conversation. Not accuracy, not fairness, appearance. She talked about relatives seeing it, about neighbors who might connect dots that weren't meant to be connected, about strangers online who don't understand the full picture but feel entitled to judge anyway. Her concern moved outward in widening circles, extended family community reputation, never inward toward the structure that had existed long before my comment. I listened. She said that putting something like that in public only created unnecessary damage. That public disagreement invites scrutiny. That once something is said online, it leaves marks that are hard to erase. Her tone wasn't accusatory so much as corrective, like she was guiding me back to the appropriate response. And then she said something that settled heavily between us. Whether it's true or not isn't the point right now. You should take the comment down. Whether it's true or not. That was the first moment I understood clearly what mattered most to her. Truth was secondary. Containment was the priority. If the story could be smoothed over, if the visible disruption could be removed, then balance, at least on the surface, could be restored. I didn't interrupt her. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I let her finish every sentence. When Dad called later that day, his tone was softer, slower. He framed things differently, but the direction was the same. He said he understood how emotions might have run high. He encouraged me to think about the bigger picture. He talked about long-term peace, about how families survive by avoiding conflicts that spiral out of control. We already have enough going on, he said. There's no reason to make things harder than they need to be. Like Mom, he never questioned the substance of what I wrote. He didn't say it was inaccurate. He didn't challenge the claim. He simply treated the comment itself as the disruption. To him, removing it was a practical solution. Delete the line, calm the situation, let things settle. As if erasing the sentence would restore what had been there before. What struck me most was what neither of them asked. No one asked how I felt reading that caption. No one asked whether the statement about no handouts had erased something real. No one said, "Was that fair to you?" The only issue was whether I would undo the public moment. Marlene never called me directly. Her presence came through my parents' voices instead. Mom told me she was overwhelmed, that the attention had been too much, that she felt exposed and deeply hurt. Dad said she felt blindsided and misunderstood. Through them, she became the one absorbing impact, the one struggling with fallout, and I became the source of it. It was subtle, but unmistakable. The framing positioned her as the injured party and me as the instigator, even though the arrangement I had referenced had existed quietly for years. Again, I didn't push back. I listened carefully to what each of them prioritized. For Mom, it was unity and reputation. For Dad, it was calm and de-escalation. Both of them emphasized harmony. Both of them avoided accountability. The facts weren't denied, but they were carefully sidestepped. Truth in those conversations felt inconvenient. The pressure wasn't loud. It didn't come as a demand. It came as reasonable advice. Suggestions about protecting the family. Reminders that public conflict leaves lasting impressions. Gentle warnings that things could spiral if I didn't act quickly. And still no one asked if what I wrote was accurate. That silence around the substance told me more than any argument would have. They weren't defending her version of events. They were defending the family's image. They wanted the narrative controlled, not examined. I realized then that deleting the comment wouldn't just remove a sentence. It would reinforce the same pattern that had allowed everything to exist quietly in the first place. Silence as stability. Silence as protection. Silence as duty. So I chose to listen instead of react. I let them express their discomfort. I let them explain why this looked bad, why it felt unnecessary, why it could have been handled differently. I didn't promise to take it down. I didn't announce that I would leave it up either. I simply absorbed the shape of their response. By the time the calls ended, nothing had been resolved, but something had become clear. The priority wasn't truth, it was containment. Not whether the structure had been fair, but whether it could remain unseen. And for the first time, I stopped managing that invisibility on their behalf. By the weekend, the story was no longer contained to that single post. At first, the shift was subtle. The flood of admiration slowed. The tone in the comments changed from confident celebration to something more careful. Instead of, "You deserve this," I started seeing questions, small ones, almost polite. "Did you finance it?" That was quick, didn't you? Just switch jobs. No one was accusing her outright. No one was hostile. But the certainty was gone. The applause had thinned into curiosity. Then the private messages began. People I hadn't spoken to in years reached out. Not dramatically, not aggressively, just cautiously. Some asked if what I wrote was accurate. Others said they were confused by the timeline. A few admitted they'd seen the comment before it disappeared under new replies and wanted to understand what had happened. That's when I realized something important. My sentence hadn't stayed confined beneath that photo. Screenshots were circulating, quietly at first, then more widely. Shared in group chats, forwarded between relatives, saved before anyone could delete them. The post no longer belonged solely to my sister. It had separated from her control and started moving on its own. Sometime that Saturday morning, the original photo disappeared. No announcement, no clarification, just gone. Along with it, several older photos vanished too. Images that hinted at timelines she probably hadn't expected people to examine closely. It was a clean sweep, an attempt to reset the narrative. But deleting it didn't quiet the situation. If anything, it did the opposite. Within hours, copies resurfaced. Full screenshots, caption comments, timestamps my reply included. The deletion didn't erase the record. It confirmed that something in it had become inconvenient. And that confirmation shifted everything. Where there had once been admiration, there was now analysis. Where people had casually scrolled past before, they were now comparing dates, matching details, asking quiet questions in spaces that weren't visible to the public feed. It wasn't loud. It wasn't explosive. It was methodical. Through my parents, I learned that Marlena was trying to track where the screenshots had come from. She wanted to know who had shared them. She insisted the situation had been taken out of context, that it was a misunderstanding that had grown legs. But no one was waiting for permission to talk anymore. That was the part that struck me most. The truth didn't require my management. I didn't add another comment. I didn't clarify. I didn't defend myself in private threads. I didn't step in to correct exaggerations or redirect speculation. I watched. The narrative had been carefully curated at first, framed, filtered, captioned to signal independence. But once a single crack appeared, people began looking at it differently. And once documentation existed outside her account, control dissolved quickly. My parents felt it too. Mom stopped talking about embarrassment in the family. Mom stopped talking about embarrassment in abstract terms and started asking how far the screenshots had spread. Dad asked whether anyone had contacted me directly. Containment was no longer simple. The most noticeable change wasn't outrage. It was silence. The same people who had commented enthusiastically days earlier grew quiet. Some deleted their own replies. Others reached out privately instead of publicly, careful not to leave a visible trail. The confidence that had fueled the original praise relied on everyone accepting the story as complete. Once that assumption cracked, the foundation weakened. What surprised me was how little I needed to do. For years, I had believed that stability required my constant involvement, that if I stepped back, things would collapse immediately. But here, the truth was unfolding without my intervention. People could see enough on their own once the polished version was interrupted. Deleting the post didn't restore control. It signaled urgency. And urgency invites scrutiny. By Sunday evening, the atmosphere felt different. Not explosive, not chaotic, just altered. The certainty was gone. The admiration had turned cautious. The story that had been declared with confidence now felt unfinished. And I remained mostly silent, not because I was avoiding it, but because I realized something had shifted permanently. Once truth is released into open space, especially in digital form, it develops a momentum of its own. It doesn't need constant reinforcement. It moves through comparison, memory, and documentation. I had written one sentence. After that, the narrative no longer depended on me. The week after everything spilled online, I made a decision I had been circling for years. I didn't announce it. I didn't draft a message explaining my reasoning. I didn't call a family meeting or outline terms. I simply stopped. The next time a familiar gap appeared, an insurance payment hovering near its due date, a casual mention of being a little short, this month I didn't step in to fill it. I let the silence hold. I treated the decision the way I treat every other financial boundary in my life, by changing my behavior instead of defending it. At first, nothing happened. A few days passed. Then a message arrived, light and carefully worded. Was something wrong on my end? Had a transfer been delayed? The tone assumed interruption, not conclusion. Underneath the politeness was a certainty that whatever had paused would soon resume. I didn't correct that assumption. I didn't rush to reassure. I simply didn't send the money. When more days passed, the tone shifted. Confusion sharpened into irritation. The questions became more direct. Was this permanent? Was I trying to make a point? Had I overreacted to the post? That was when the structure began to reveal itself. For years, the support had been framed as occasional help, temporary, flexible, optional. But once it stopped, the absence felt immediate and heavy. Bills that once seemed manageable started to strain. Plans stalled. Small shortfalls grew visible because they were no longer quietly absorbed. I didn't need to point any of that out. The gap did it for me. Mom was the first to apply pressure again. Her calls carried concern layered over frustration. She spoke about stress, about stability, about how fragile everything already felt after the public attention. She said this wasn't the time to add more strain. The implication was clear: my decision was escalating an already tense situation. She didn't frame it as a demand. She framed it as a responsibility. Dad followed with a softer approach. He asked practical questions. Was this a temporary pause? Was there room to reconsider? He talked about smoothing things over and preventing long-term damage. Families, he reminded me, survive by making allowances, by bending a little when things get hard. Neither of them asked whether the arrangement had been sustainable. Neither questioned whether it had been fair. The focus stayed fixed on outcome, on discomfort, on disruption, on the ripple effect of my withdrawal. What became obvious was this: the support had stopped being seen as a choice a long time ago. It had become part of the family's operating system. A silent safety net woven so tightly into daily life that removing it felt like sabotage instead of self-preservation. I listened to all of it. I let them express their worries. I heard the frustration disguised as concern. I understood the fear of instability, but I didn't negotiate. I didn't offer partial solutions. I didn't suggest scaled-back transfers or temporary bridges. I didn't agree to revisit the conversation in a few months. I knew from experience that explanations only opened doors to bargaining. And bargaining was exactly what had blurred the boundary in the first place. So I stayed steady. There was no dramatic confrontation, no final speech about sacrifice or exhaustion. I didn't list totals or recount history. I simply let my actions speak. The transfers that once moved automatically did not move. The emotional clarity that came with that choice surprised me. For years, I had told myself that keeping peace required flexibility, that love meant absorbing tension before it spread, that if I didn't step in, things would unravel in ways that would be blamed on me anyway. But when I finally stepped back, I realized something else. I had been redirecting consequences. Every time I filled a gap, I prevented someone else from feeling the full weight of their decisions. I thought I was protecting the family. In reality, I was protecting a system that relied on my silence. As the days turned into a week, the urgency in their voices began to shift. The expectation that I would eventually relent weakened. Conversations grew shorter. The pressure lost its rhythm. That loss of rhythm was telling. The same way support had once flowed, predictably. Pressure now tried to follow a pattern, calls, reminders, appeals to harmony. When those efforts didn't change anything, the pattern faltered. There was a quiet recalibration happening on the other end of the line. And for the first time, I allowed that recalibration to unfold without intervening. I wasn't trying to punish anyone. I wasn't trying to prove a point. I was stepping out of a role that had been assigned to me without ever being explicitly discussed. The tension didn't disappear. It settled into something heavier, more resigned, but underneath that tension was something I hadn't felt in years: ownership of my own choices. I wasn't financing a version of stability that depended on me staying quiet. I wasn't smoothing over discomfort before it reached anyone else. I wasn't absorbing the shock so others could avoid it. The absence of my support wasn't an accident anymore. It was intentional. And that intention changed everything. For the first time, the balance of responsibility began to shift. Not because I argued it into existence, but because I stopped carrying what was never fully mine to begin with. About a month after I stopped sending money, the consequences stopped being abstract. They became visible. Bills that had once been handled quietly began stacking up. The car payment, so polished and symbolic in that original photo, started to feel different when late fees appeared. Insurance notices arrived with firmer language and shorter deadlines. Credit card balances, which had always hovered just below alarming, began creeping higher without the usual quiet correction. At first, it was framed as a temporary rough patch. A few adjustments, a little bad timing. Marlene tried to stretch things, delaying payments here, asking for extensions there. But the rhythm she'd grown used to was gone. There was no invisible cushion smoothing out the gaps. When those measures didn't work, she turned to Mom and Dad. It didn't sound dramatic in the beginning. A grocery bill, a utility payment, helped to bridge the month so her credit wouldn't take a hit. The language stayed small and contained. What surprised them wasn't that she needed help. It was how often she needed it. Within weeks, they were covering expenses they'd never directly seen before. They learned what the monthly car payment actually looked like, what the insurance premium really cost, how quickly interest accumulated when balances weren't cleared right away. They saw the pattern up close, not as a vague understanding, but as line items and due dates. The scale was different than they expected. For years, I had managed those details quietly. I had absorbed the irregularities before they reached anyone else. Without that buffer, the numbers were no longer theoretical. They landed directly on my parents' shoulders. The atmosphere shifted almost immediately. Family conversations grew cautious. Someone would mention plans, then hesitate, mentally calculating what was affordable now. Mom started calling more often, and her voice sounded tired in a way it hadn't before. She talked about rising costs, about how quickly small commitments add up. There was confusion in her tone, as if she hadn't realized how extensive the support structure had been. Dad grew quieter. When he spoke, his words were measured, practical. He wasn't angry exactly, but there was strain underneath his calm. And gradually something else happened. The frustration needed somewhere to land. Instead of asking how Marlene would adjust long-term, the conversations began circling back to me. Why had I stopped so suddenly? Why hadn't I given more warning? Why choose this moment when everything already felt unstable? The language shifted. Subtly, I was described as inflexible, as someone who had changed the rules without notice. The fact that there had never been formal rules to begin with seemed to disappear. What mattered was that the flow had stopped. I became the perceived cause of instability. It was easier, I think, to focus on the moment support ended than to confront how dependent the arrangement had become. As long as I had been cushioning everything, the system felt stable. Once I stepped back, the imbalance became obvious. But acknowledging that imbalance would have meant admitting it had existed for years. Blame is often simpler than reflection. I noticed changes in other ways too. I wasn't included in casual planning like before. Updates reached me secondhand. Conversations felt guarded, as if my presence complicated things now. What I began to understand was that my role had never been purely financial. I had been emotional insulation, a buffer that allowed everyone else to avoid hard conversations. When that insulation was removed, the weight of reality pressed directly on them, and that weight felt uncomfortable. By the end of that month, nothing had exploded publicly. There were no dramatic scenes or final ultimatums, but the household felt tighter, conversations shorter, patience thinner. From the outside, it might have looked like I created the disruption by withdrawing, but from where I stood, the disruption had always been there. I had simply stopped absorbing it. The car still existed. The bills still arrived. The obligations didn't vanish when I stepped away. They just became visible to the people who had once assumed everything was under control. And as that visibility settled in, so did the narrative that I was the one who made things harder. It's strange how quickly a silent solution becomes the villain once it stops operating. But I understood something by then that I hadn't fully grasped before. Stopping didn't create the instability, it revealed it. The meeting happened at the house where everything had always been decided quietly. The same living room, the same careful arrangement of furniture, the same unspoken expectation that conflict would be softened before it ever fully formed. No one suggested meeting somewhere neutral. Marlene arrived first. She didn't sit. She stood near the window, arms folded tightly as if bracing against something cold. Her face wasn't tearful. It was rigid, controlled. The kind of control that trembles underneath. When Beverly walked in, she felt the shift immediately. Not anger exactly. Not yet. Something sharper. A kind of moral accusation that had already been rehearsed. Mom and Dad were seated on opposite ends of the couch. not united, not divided, just positioned, waiting. It was Marlene who spoke first. You humiliated me. There was no greeting, no preamble, just the accusation delivered cleanly. The word hung in the room. Beverly didn't respond immediately. She let the silence breathe. Not because she didn't have something to say, but because she had learned that reacting quickly only fed the escalation. I didn't make it public, Beverly said evenly. I stopped hiding it. That was the moment the air changed. No one challenged the statement. No one said it wasn't true. No one corrected a detail or disputed the facts. The issue was never whether the transfers had happened, whether the bills had been covered, whether the support had been ongoing for years. The truth itself was untouched. Marlene's jaw tightened. You could have talked to me. You didn't have to let people see that. Again, not that it was false, not that it was exaggerated, just that it was seen. Mom leaned forward slightly, her voice soft but strained. It's not about right or wrong. It's about how things look. Family matters shouldn't be exposed like that. Exposed, as if truth were something indecent. Dad cleared his throat. We've always handled things privately. That's how we've kept peace. Peace. Another word that meant silence. Beverly felt the familiar pattern forming, the reframing, the smoothing over the shift, from substance to optics. This isn't about people online, Marlene continued. It's about how you made me look, like I can't manage my own life. Beverly didn't interrupt. She listened, because underneath the accusation, she could hear something else. Not guilt, not accountability. Fear. The fear of losing the image that had been so carefully maintained. The admiration, the perception of independence. Mom stepped in again, her tone gentler, now almost pleading. Your sister has worked hard to build her life. We all make sacrifices. You know that. There it was, the word that always arrived when boundaries were set. Sacrifice. We supported each other, Dad added quickly. That's what families do. Supported each other. Beverly let the words pass through her. They weren't entirely false, but they were incomplete. The support had never been mutual. The structure had never been equal. And the sacrifices had not been distributed evenly. Still, she didn't argue, because this meeting wasn't about accounting. It wasn't about relitigating years of transfers or tallying what had been given. It was about one thing: visibility. Marlene's voice softened slightly, but the edge remained. You could have told me you were going to stop. You could have given me time. I did give time, Beverly said quietly. Years of it. No one responded to that. Instead, Mom shifted the focus again. You have to understand how this feels for her. It's embarrassing. Embarrassing. Beverly noticed how consistently the conversation circled back to discomfort, to image, to unity, to keeping things smooth. Not once did anyone say the support hadn't happened. Not once did anyone suggest she had lied. The truth was never disputed, only its exposure. Dad's tone grew firmer. Families don't turn on each other. We don't withdraw support when things get hard. There was the subtle accusation now, the suggestion that her boundary was abandonment. Beverly felt the weight of that narrative pressing toward her. The old reflex to justify, to explain, to prove that she wasn't cruel. But she didn't step into it. She understood something, now that she hadn't understood before. If she defended herself, she would be negotiating the premise that she owed continued support. And she didn't. I'm not turning on anyone, she said calmly. I'm stepping out of something that isn't healthy. Marlene shook her head. You're blowing this up over pride. No, Beverly replied. I stopped pretending. Silence again. The parents exchanged a look. Not of disagreement with her statement, but of frustration. The kind that comes when the old structure refuses to reassemble. Mom tried once more. Can't we find a middle ground? Maybe just until things stabilize? There it was, the attempt to reopen the flow. To soften the boundary into something temporary, flexible, negotiable. Beverly felt the clarity settle inside her like something solid. This wasn't anger. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't punishment. It was a decision. I'm not transferring money anymore, she said simply. No raised voice, no emphasis, just a statement. Dad's expression hardened. So that's it? After everything? Yes, she said. That's it. Marlene looked stunned, not because she hadn't expected resistance, but because she had expected movement. A crack, a concession, something. But there was none. Beverly didn't argue about fairness. She didn't demand apologies. She didn't outline past sacrifices. She just refused further financial involvement. The room felt unfamiliar after that, as if the old script had ended mid-scene and no one had prepared the next lines. Marlene's accusation of humiliation still lingered in the air. The parents' language of unity and sacrifice still echoed faintly, but the truth remained untouched. The support had existed. The transfers had been routine. The dependence had been real, and now it was over. Not with a fight, not with a dramatic rupture, just with a boundary that would not bend. Beverly stood not abruptly, just deliberately. There was nothing left to add. No new argument to introduce. For the first time in that house, silence did not feel like submission. It felt like completion. In the quiet that followed, Beverly built something simple and steady: bills paid on time, evenings without tension, conversations she could enter or leave by choice. The distance wasn't dramatic, it was peaceful. The boundary held not because anyone approved of it, but because she did. If stories about family truth and the courage to draw a line resonate with you, stay a while. There's more to explore together.